Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider.
Hello, and welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism. This is Mason Westbrook. I am alone today. Let's see if this place explodes, all right? I just wanted to say good morning. I guess it's not morning anymore. Sarah is not feeling very well, and we've been talking about, of course, she'd done a couple of podcasts just on her own, and we've been talking about me doing the same thing. And today just ended up being a good day because we needed to record and she's not feeling well. So welcome. It's good to see you here. I hope that you guys are feeling well. I hope that something that comes from today is helpful for you. I think I'm going to bear a little bit of my soul today. And so I'm a little uncomfortable, a little bit nervous about that. And nervous about not having Sarah take control so I can just tell jokes in the background. I'm not sure how that's going to go, but welcome. So today I wanted to talk about, there was an experience that we had. My parents were just here for the last week or so, half a week, and they came to watch my second son graduate. He's Brig. He's the one that has schizophrenia, and we've had some exciting stories over that. Some of his teachers were able to tell some stories, and we were able to share some experiences that we've had with Brig over the years. And one thing that Sarah said he had a private ceremony because he just would not tolerate a graduation ceremony with lots of people and everybody moving at the same time and trying to do all that stuff. He just wouldn't tolerate that very well. So we had a private ceremony and we loved it. And so we were able to share just a few things about him. And one of the things that Sarah said that I had forgotten about, but I knew about, but had just forgotten about, was that we were told sometime around the time that Brig was 7, 8 years old, one of the doctors said, I would be surprised if Brig is still in your home and functioning by the time he's 10 or 11. And now fast forward to now he's 18 and graduating from high school. There were lots of different things put into place in order to allow him to be successful. And it's just amazing to see him doing well. It's beautiful. So my parents came out for that. And the interesting thing is that since Sarah left the church officially, my mom has been far less vocal with Sarah. One of the things that I've been blessed with in my life is that Sarah and my mom have gotten along really well. And so over the years, the 23, 24 years that we've been together, there's been a lot of communication between my mom and Sarah, and it's been a wonderful thing. And over the last 12 months, there's been very little communication between Sarah and my mom, and it's been hard on all of us, especially Sarah, because so many people cut themselves out of your life when you make a decision like I'm leaving a high demand religion. I imagine we're not the only ones to feel that, and I just kind of wanted to throw that out there because of the struggle. And what it made me think is that I've learned a lot of lessons over the last couple of years, maybe even the last 5 to 10 years. I've learned a lot of lessons. And I wanted to share some of those because really, as I watched my mom talk with Sarah, it was the first time that my mom had brought up, well, tell me what's going on. Tell me why you left Mormonism. What are your struggles? And her comments were very akin to what mine were and would have been a couple of years ago. And it made me recognize how much I've grown and changed over the years. How much I've been able to truly see another person's perspective. And it's been rewarding. It was helpful to see that from that perspective and just to kind of to get a glimpse of that. It was wonderful. So let me just tell you a little bit about me. I haven't shared a whole lot of who I am on this podcast. It's certainly not in relation to what Sarah has done, because she has spent so much time being vulnerable and just telling you about her journey. We did the 5 reasons the biggest reasons that she left the church, and you really kind of got to see into her soul a little bit on those things. And I have been vulnerable with family, and I'm certainly not absent of vulnerability, but I don't know that anyone really knows me very well. And I'm not going that far back, but I'd like to go back a few years. And some of what you're going to hear, you've heard before, but I think just in the context of who I am and getting to these lessons that I've learned, I'd like to just share those. Sarah and I were married in 1999, both in the temple. I had just come home from a mission, hadn't been home for quite a year, almost a year, and we settled into a pretty decent life. I had tried really hard to be a good husband, good father as the years went by, and I think I had a pretty high opinion of how I was doing. There were certainly some wake-ups along the way, and that has kind of driven me. But then we get to about 2011, 2012. We had 5 children, and we had decided that we were going to adopt again. And so we went through the process. This time we went through an agency. We hadn't done that since the very first attempt to adopt. Went through an agency, got our pictures up, all that jazz. And within 24 hours of having our profile up, we got paired with a mom. And that mom was having twins. And it was exciting. I don't remember how long it was, 2 or 3 months until mom was going to deliver. So we had contact with mom. Sarah especially talked with her and got to know her a little bit. And then the babies came early, most likely because mom had struggled with drug abuse throughout her life, and probably during the pregnancy as well, most likely. And so the babies came early. We were in North Carolina. They were in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So Sarah took off and went up to be there for that. And just a short time later, I was able to get off. So I grabbed all the kids. We threw them in the big van and we drove out to Pennsylvania so that we could see the girls. It ended up being twin girls. And Sarah spent 6 days with those girls in the NICU. I spent a day or 2 there with the kids, but then I took the kids home. It was, of course, very difficult to just be in a hotel with 5 kids, one of them being Brig, and just don't tolerate those kind of things very well. So we left Sarah there, and then I drove home. Well, after 6 days of taking care of those kids in the NICU, Dad, who was, I'm going to say dirtbag, just because that is how I felt. He had other children that he was not taking care of. He had believed that something that had been said that made him believe that he was going to get some of the money, that the cost for adoption, he was going to get some of that money, and then he found out he wasn't, and he decided he wasn't going to sign the papers. And so those girls, and he wasn't going to take care of them. He just wasn't going to sign the papers for adoption. So we went home brokenhearted, and those girls went into the foster system. And the big piece of this story that I want to share today, because it's just a part of my vulnerability, is Sarah was devastated. She had really bonded with those girls over 6 days. Not that she, there's always a place in your heart when you're adopting into foster care where you recognize that the possibility exists that you won't take them home, they won't be yours forever, but she had truly bonded with them. And one of the things that I've always done to protect myself that I didn't even realize I did for a long time is I would just build walls. And yes, the girls were cute, and I hope that we get to bring them home, but I'm not opening up my heart until they're home. And maybe not completely until the papers are signed and they're legally and officially ours. But the problem was I didn't recognize how much she was hurting. And she looked at me and it looked as if I wasn't hurting at all. And I was hurting some, but I was not hurting the way that she was, because I had just not allowed my heart to open. And so there was a lot less for me to grieve, because I hadn't really connected. And from that time, we started to split a little bit because she was so emotionally hurt by the fact that I didn't grieve with her. And I didn't learn that until much later. But that was where that started. Then I go through anesthesia school. That was a year in San Antonio, 2 years in North Carolina. We went back there. And then we went to Fort Hood, Texas, in the middle of Texas. And a year later, I was called as a bishop. And during all of this time, phase one, a year in San Antonio, was almost all academic, and it was just hard. It was the first time in my life where I looked around the classroom and I knew I was definitely not the smartest person in the room. I was truly among peers and graders, and it was just tough. And then the 2 years that I went to anesthesia school were the hardest 2 years of my life. It was clinicals. You were up and in the OR by 5 o'clock, 5:30 at the latest in the morning, getting stuff set up. Every time you were in the OR, you were with instructors, some of them very, very good at helping you learn and grow, and some of them not so much so. And it was just rough. It was tough. It was hard. And I thought I did the best that I could to balance the efforts with school and the needs of my family. But the reality is it just wasn't enough. And so the split, the emotional separation between me and Sarah continued to grow. And I didn't really recognize it. I was very ignorant emotionally, and so I just didn't see it. And then we went to Killeen and in Texas, and I had a year of just kind of getting my feet underneath me as a brand new anesthesia provider. And it was tough at times, but mostly it was good. It was a little healing for us, not getting my time just dragged away to other places. And then I got called as a bishop. And of course, my time got split again between work and family, and now my service in the bishopric. And it was really rough. Then I deployed, stayed as a bishop. I went to Afghanistan for 4.5 months. So I was gone all in total about 5.5 months, which is a relatively short deployment as far as the Army goes, but it was still time away. And then I came home, still served as a bishop, and we looked for where we could go because I had 2 years left on my contract till I could retire from the Army. So we looked around because we knew we were going to move, or we were going to have to ask for stabilization and stay in Killeen, and we didn't want to move again after I retired. So we looked at Killeen. We really didn't want to stay there. We were in post housing, so we'd have to move either way. So we looked around at where we could go. We settled on Missouri. I called HRC, and they told me that they had a spot for me in Missouri and that we could get there. We could go right away, probably. So we looked around. Sarah makes decisions very fast. So she went to Zillow or whatever and looked through the homes in the area because we didn't want to live right next to Fort Leonard Wood. We were tired of our kids losing friends every couple of months because the military life just takes people away. And so we found a place about an hour from Fort Leonard Wood, and we bought that home, closed on it, and then the orders didn't come through. One of the very common ideas in the Army is don't do anything until you have orders in hand, and we chose to do it. We felt like it was the right thing for us. It would get Brig to be able to start high school and stay in that school for his whole time in high school, and we thought that was really important. And so we made that choice, but what that did is it separated us for about a year. So they moved in April. I didn't make it to Missouri until near the end of February. And so there was another year where we were separated. I was still in Texas. They were still here. For a couple of months, I was still the bishop. So I was trying to be a good bishop. And again, just not very emotionally intelligent. Every time I had been separated from my family, I did not do a good job of trying to be with them emotionally. I just didn't know how. And then during that separation was the time near the end that Sarah got her first tattoo. And I blew up. I was not happy with that at all. I acted like a very overbearing patriarchal man, and I didn't understand. Now, I will add a little caveat. I was worried because she had told me that she was going through grief. It was her dog. We'd had to put her down because she was getting violent. She was chasing after and bit the UPS man, and she was just starting to act like she was getting a little delusional. And Sarah was by herself. She was taking care of 7 children by herself at that time. And it would be overwhelming for anyone. Sarah is incredible with the children. She was also trying to set up her own business, and it was just hard. It was overwhelming. There was so much that she had to do that she was responsible for that I couldn't help with. She had 3 special needs kids in the home now, and they're just overwhelming. For those of you that have special needs kids, you understand how difficult that can be. She had 3. She was a single parent. And when she lost her dog, she broke a little. She'd wanted a tattoo for a long time. She went down to a tattoo parlor. In this case, I think she just went to the first one that she could find that was available that would do it. She got a tattoo on her wrist, and it hurt badly. The inside of her wrist is typically a pretty painful spot, but she didn't even notice the pain until she was about halfway through the tattoo. That's when something finally clicked, and she became completely aware of where she was. So I was also scared because that's not like her, and I was worried about her. And just a few weeks or a couple months later, I don't remember the timeline, she had a nervous breakdown. And shortly thereafter, I was able to finally make it to Missouri and be there with her, and she had another nervous breakdown shortly thereafter, and she's actually shared that experience where she became suicidal. And she went to the hospital, and as she was examining her life, what could I give up? She was already halfway out of the church. She already knew so much that was disturbing for her, and the church is what was gone. So I acted abhorrently. I think it's probably the only time in my life where I was cruel to Sarah. And I have no excuse. But as I look back over the lessons that I've learned, I have a better understanding of why. And that's really what I want to share today is what is it that I've learned that allowed me to be that way then and will not allow me to be that way now. I hope that the lessons that I can share are valuable to you. I know that some of you have been in this place before or certainly have been around people like this, and I hope that in sharing that vulnerability for me, that it can be beneficial to you. I want to start with just a little quip here from Brené Brown. This is from her audio book, a presentation called The Power of Vulnerability. And she says, vulnerability is the center of difficult emotion, but it's also the beginning of every positive emotion we need in our lives. Mostly, I had started to study Brené Brown when I became a bishop. I realized that I needed to understand people better. Sarah was working as a counselor shortly thereafter, and she was teaching me things that helped me to be able to counsel people, helped me to know my limits, helped me to be able to send them to other people when they needed that, helped me to just be able to take care of people, which I loved. And so I started studying Brené Brown. I've listened to this particular presentation at least 4 times. I've sat and listened to it slowly so I could take notes. I have like 12 pages of notes of that I keep that I can go back to at times or share in these podcasts. It was the first time in my life that I really started to understand what the power of emotion and the need for emotion and connection in our lives. So as I try to be vulnerable today, I'm going to stumble and fall. I'm not very good at it, but I hope that I can share something that will be of value to you. So I'm grateful, at least, when I came home from work one day, when my parents were here just recently, Sarah and my mom were sitting and they were talking about church things. And I was a little surprised by that. They were both calm. They were civil. I appreciated that because that doesn't happen a lot. Unfortunately, we get passionate about things. So it was a civil conversation. But one of the things that I noticed is that my mom had a lot of programmed responses, specifically something along the lines of, I accept this is how you feel. And I can understand why that feels on that side of things as if it's an adequate response. But it demonstrates the fact that there's no real listening going on. There's no acknowledgement of the fact that that's painful for someone. There's no acknowledgement of the fact that the issues and concerns are real issues and concerns. And that was the struggle there. And it's the struggle that I have and that I saw in myself. So Sarah left the church and she gave me time, gratefully. She knows that I'm a very slow decision maker, and she gave me time to just kind of process that and to study things out on my own and just get the information. After about a year, I had done very little study. I'd done some. I'd read most or all of the CES letter. I've read a few other things, but I hadn't really delved into the information to understand it. I was aware of it, and that was about it. And it came to a crisis point as we were driving home from something, I don't remember, a long journey. It was like Arizona or something. We're going back from Arizona to Missouri. And she felt so stifled by my attitude because she felt like anytime she tried to teach the kids something that was quote unquote anti-Mormon, I would get up in arms about it. I would say, we're not going to talk about that. And I did not mean to be stifling her and silencing her, but it is what I was doing. And I didn't recognize it until that time. And what scared me was she actually threatened to pull over. I think we were close to Oklahoma City or something. She said, take me to the airport. I'm flying home. I'm not staying with you when you act like this. And I think we need to look at getting a divorce. And it was the first time in this journey that I recognized that the way I was behaving towards my wife was not healthy. I was not acknowledging the issues that she was struggling with. It didn't have anything to do with me agreeing with the issues or agreeing with her point of view. It had everything to do with the fact that I was not acknowledging that the issues were real, that they were painful, and that they were affecting her in a very negative way to the point that she could not stay in the church. So from that point on, I changed. I really started to study the issues. I really started to listen and understand, and I really started to acknowledge and understand why they were a struggle for her. It took me a long time to really decide if the issues mattered to me, but they mattered to her, and I made understanding them a priority so that we could come together on them. So some of the things that I've learned about myself. I am quick to judge a situation, assuming that I understand when I don't. I want that to sink in just a little bit. I don't know who or what you do as a listener in your life. I know now that I have a history of and a prevalence to judge a situation quickly, assuming that I understand it when I don't. And the reason that has really hit me is I see that in the people around me, specifically my family, the few that have reached out to try and I don't really feel like too many of my family members have really tried to understand where I'm coming from. They have simply tried to understand enough to talk me out of it. And so as those conversations have happened, I've recognized that that is what I do. That I also have done that as an active member and just in my life in general. I think that I understand a situation, I judge it quickly, And then I go from that judgment instead of taking the time to truly understand what someone is saying, what they're going through. And the reason that that is the case is because I'm a problem solver. But the reason that I'm a problem solver is because I don't want to feel it. I don't want to just sit in the emotion. I have long felt, and I will have this self dialogue with myself. What point does it serve to feel this way? Let's move on and get it taken care of. And that is why I have not been able to feel the emotion of the situation. I have not been able to just sit with it, sit with someone as they feel it. Not until probably the last 6 to 12 months of my life have I been able to really do that. I've said once before on the podcast that when I recognize empathy is necessary, I'm pretty good at being empathetic, but I have to recognize it. I can't just be empathetic, or at least I couldn't at that time. I'm getting much better at that. And this is a journey. It's going to take a long time for me to completely change my initial reactions to a situation. But recognition, I like to say this, it's kind of corny, recognition is the first step to recovery. Understanding that I'm doing something in a way that is not effective is the first way for me to then change how I do it so that I can be effective and can be the kind of person I want to be. Mormons, high demand religions excel at this, thinking that they understand a situation, judging it, and then immediately responding according to their judgment. For example, if I start to talk about what issues bother me with my dad, there's some degree of understanding there. I don't really feel like there's any empathy there. There is a drive to convince me it's not an issue. Or for him to go say, well, give me some references so I can go study it. And then he'll come back and say, yeah, I don't really feel like that was what you were talking about, or that kind of thing. It's all this conversation to basically say, I didn't see it the way you did. I'm still faithful, and that's not a problem. And it's the way he says it is, it's almost like it's not a problem for me. I don't understand why it's a problem for you. When what really needs to happen is for him to say, I don't get it. Can you help me understand why this is such an issue for you? When I studied it, I didn't really feel like it was, so can you help me understand? And that is a judgment-free approach. Instead of judging the situation and saying, that shouldn't bother you, you take the time instead to say, I don't understand why that bothers you. Can you help me understand? It allows for the communication and understanding to happen. I don't need him to agree with me. At the end of that conversation, if he still says, yeah, that's not an issue for me, but I can see why it's an issue for you. It makes sense why it's a struggle for you. That is understanding. And if after all of our conversations, he stays in the church, I'm fine with that. But if he can understand me and why it's an issue for me, then we've made progress. So that was the first lesson for me, is that I'm quick to judge a situation. I don't want to be like that. I don't want to judge a situation, because when I judge a situation, I am immediately stacking opinions, and I've essentially put my opinion higher than someone else's. And that's not how I want to respond. It's not who I want to be. I want to be able to honor and have compassion for someone who is struggling in a situation, and nothing else. If they come to me and say, hey, can you help me work through this? Maybe there's some room for conversation, but they're only going to do that if they feel like I understand them. That's where I want to be. That's what I need, is that. So the second one is, I'm quick to rise in passion levels when someone isn't understanding me and the topic feels important. I don't know if you've ever been there. I assume that people have, but you've been in those conversations where you start out kind of mellow, your voices are calm, it's just a conversation, and then suddenly something happens and now tempos are rising, tempers might be rising a little bit, you're shouting a little bit more, maybe you're not shouting, but you're certainly louder than you were, and it's almost like there's this emphasis on, you will hear me. You will hear what I have to say. Now, you can understand as a listener that isn't very healthy. Either I'm now trying something else to force you to hear what I say because I don't feel like you are, or I've lost control of what I wanted to accomplish. For instance, if I feel like I have to raise my voice in a conversation, there's lots of things going on that are not the way that I want them. And rather than raise my voice, it's the time I think, and it's the time that I think I need to step back and instead re-examine the situation and say, I'm feeling like I want to get more passionate. What's going on? Oh, I know what it is. My mom is not listening to what I have to say. And then I can say, well, is mom capable of hearing what I have to say? Is she choosing not to hear what I have to say? Is this a bad time? Are there other things going on? If you'll go back to our podcast about reading the room, there might be some helpful things in there, recognizing when you can and cannot discuss a subject. And I might have to just step back and say, I am not raising my voice. If I feel like I have to be heard, then maybe it's time to change up what's going on. Maybe it's time to end the conversation. Maybe it's time to say something like, Mom, I really appreciate the fact that we can have this civil discussion. I don't feel like you're hearing what I'm saying. That gives her the chance to say something like, well, I am hearing you. That's a clue to me that we probably can't continue this conversation. Or she can say something like, oh, well, what is it that I'm doing that makes you feel like I'm not hearing you? And then maybe we can discuss that and go from there as to what needs to happen. But shouting my opinion is not going to help the conversation. And this happened at one point in time. So I came in, I sat down and let Sarah and Mom talk still. I joined the conversation a couple of times, and then I started to get I didn't really feel upset. I didn't feel upset, but I felt like the conversation was confused. And if I added some input, maybe I could kind of straighten that out. That didn't help, and I had to back off. And unfortunately, I didn't really recognize that myself. Sarah reminded me and kind of called attention to it that maybe you need to just back off right now, and I did. Well, then later on, after the conversation was over, I was feeding the dogs, we were getting ready to do dinner, and Mom came in to the mudroom where I was, and I asked her a question. I said, Mom, I have a question for you. What had to happen in order for, I think the first one I started with was, what had to happen in order for the Jews of Jesus's time to become Christians? And she had some other answers. They were kind of squirrely. Either she wasn't really understanding what I was asking, or she was just coming from that place of faith, and it was kind of awkward. But I finally whittled it down right to this thing, and I said, Mom, what had to happen was they had to accept the possibility that this new information could be accurate, could be true, to speak in the high demand religion phrases. It could be true. So these Jews of Jesus's time, in order to accept Jesus as the Savior, in order to accept what he called the new law that was meant to fulfill or basically replace the law of Moses, they had to accept the possibility that it was true. If you look at other generations, when Moses came in, the Jews had to accept the possibility that what Moses had to teach them was accurate. Not that it was true, they had to accept the possibility that it was true. Because if you research something with the thought in your head, there is no way this is true, you're only going to support your own already made up mind that it isn't. Because you're going to see everything from the lens that if this doesn't support my already pre-made understanding, it must be false. Someone else altered it. Someone tampered with it. This is not right. This is coming from an excommunicated member. Well, they just wanted to destroy the church, or all these rationalities that we make, because everything has to support the premise that we've already decided that it's true. In order for that to change, we have to be able to accept the possibility that something could be different. And that has applicability in so many different aspects of our lives. For those of you that are struggling with marriage problems or with children or a relationship with someone, you have to be able to, if you want to move forward in that relationship, if you want to have a chance of healing that relationship, you have to accept the possibility that that person can change. That this thing that we have now, whether it be counseling or whatever, can change the way that we look at things so that we can make this work. But if you go into the counseling session or you go into the relationship already deciding this is not going to make any difference, you're right. And it won't make any difference for you. And so if you're looking at these things, and I am coming from my own place here. I've been there. I have been in that place where I'm studying things and immediately trying to just put it into its place so that it can continue to not affect my own quote-unquote testimony, my own quote-unquote faith, my own quote-unquote belief in a certain situation, a certain religion, a certain concept about life. I'm already categorizing those things because that's what it is. I remember when months ago, Sarah and my mom were having a conversation just about polygamy. And Sarah said, well, I have a real problem with the fact that he married and had sex with 14-year-old girls. And my mom's first response was he didn't have sex with them. There's nothing out there that shows that that's the case. It's her trying to compartmentalize and hold on to something that she was taught in order to rationalize something that is uncomfortable. And she has the right to do that, but it's a logical fallacy. It's thought stopping. It doesn't allow for the ability for something else to be possible, for something else to be true. The next one is I'm quick to assume that I understand the situation better than you. So similar to the first one, I'm quick to judge a situation assuming that I understand. In this case, I'm quick to assume that I understand it better than you do. And that just bothers me. It bothers me a lot because it is so self-centered. It's very egotistical. It's almost narcissistic. The idea that no matter what the situation is, and usually this is surrounding things that I have an understanding of. So if you came to me to talk about Mormon doctrine 1 to 2 years ago, and maybe even a little bit today, although I'm trying not to be that way, I would assume that I understood Mormon doctrine better than you did. And in a lot of cases that was true, but certainly in other cases it was definitely not true. And whether or not it is true is not the point. The point is that I set myself up in an egotistical way, and that stops understanding. It stops me trying to understand what it is you're looking for because I already think that I understand what you want. And that's the problem. If they're kind of tandem, this judging a situation, assuming that I understand it, and quickly assuming that I understand the situation better than you. They're kind of in tandem, but they're a little bit different, which is why I separated them. It's very overbearing. In some ways, it's very patriarchal for me. I've noticed that tends to be more the case with other women than with other men. And I don't like it. I don't like that has been the case. And so it's one of the things that I've worked on. It's one of the things that I'm challenging myself on. I hope that you can see this vulnerability and recognize that these are not things that I'm justifying, because they're not. I'm not okay with recognizing these things in myself and holding on to them. I am okay with recognizing them and doing my best to rid myself of them. And it's a process. So I see this especially in things like family members that are, for instance, so I don't think that any of my family members, my direct siblings, would ever have thought that they knew more about the gospel than I do. That's an assumption that I'm making, but that's kind of always been the thing. Like, I have been a gospel scholar and I've been able to understand and explain things in a way that just makes it feel like I really, really get it. And of course, I know lots of scriptures. I can reference tons of scriptures. I can tell you where they are. I'm a very good scriptorian. It's just one of the talents that I have in my life that I'm grateful for. But it always then translated into the fact that you would just assume that I know more than you do about it. And I see that with my family. Now there's this change. They all know that I'm struggling with the gospel, that I'm certainly not the faithful person that they thought I was. And now it feels a little bit like they all assume that they understand the gospel or the church or the doctrine better than I do. What changed? The only thing that changed was my adherence to it. I haven't forgotten what the doctrines of the church are. I haven't forgotten where the scriptures are, how to justify the doctrines. I've simply started to see things from a different perspective. And so the point being that I see this in apologists. When apologists trying to explain something or explain something away, they assume that they project as if they understand it better than you do. Obviously, you're asking this question because you just don't understand the situation. And that's how they play it off. I've seen that from missionaries. Missionaries will come into your home and immediately assume that you don't know anything about what they know. They've got to reteach you the concept of God. They've got to reteach you the concept of Jesus Christ. They've got to reteach you values and morals. They've got to reteach you everything. And it's a very egotistical way to approach the situation. So I see it in those kind of situations, and I would imagine you guys as the listeners could come up with other situations where you've seen that. But that's the danger. And let me just state it one more time. I'm quick to assume that I understand the situation better than you. And that doesn't allow for a healthy dynamic of a relationship, of a conversation, of equality in understanding something. And that's something I have to pull away from. It's something I have to change in my life. So I got two more here. The next one is I'm quick to assume my solution will work better than yours. Where did this come from? I don't know. I feel like my dad is kind of misogynistic. He's very patriarchal. He's quietly so in a lot of ways, but I don't feel like he really respects my mother in an equality sense. And so I got that from him growing up. I certainly got it from the church. The church teaches incessantly that their solution to religion and spirituality is the best one. There is absolutely nothing out there that is better than what they have. They might admit to the fact that maybe they don't have everything right now because it's a quote unquote ongoing restoration, that things will change, but they will never admit that any other church, any other organization out there is doing something better than they do. And it's toxic. It is so toxic because it does not allow you to learn from the people around you. It does not allow you to recognize that the way you do it is not the best way, that maybe even is toxic, that maybe is even wounding the people around you. It does not allow you to grow. Because how do you grow if everything that you've got is already the best? There's no growth there. And there's no real attempt to understand somebody else because you've already devalued what they have. Why would I listen to you explain that to me? I already know. Or what you're trying to explain just doesn't matter because what I have is better than what you have. It's so toxic. It's so demeaning to the people around you, and it hurts people. Is one of the struggles that I have with things like blacks in the Mormon church. It's one of the struggles that I have with things like the LGBTQ community in religion in general, but particularly in Mormonism. It's one of the problems that I have with the fact that women are still repressed in the Mormon church. I have a struggle with all of those things because there seemed to be, I won't make the assumption that there was, but there seemed to be no attempt to understand how what you were doing affected that population. There was no attempt to understand how what you're doing is affecting that population. When did they change the policy about blacks in the priesthood? They changed it when they had finally moved into Africa and started having success in their missionary programs. They were getting enough people into the church who were black that they had to change or give up on all that success. So they changed. When did they change the policy on the LGBTQ children? They changed it when they recognized that the policy was hurting people. They only will make the change when it becomes necessary for them, because you cannot take criticism or advice from anyone if you believe, you honestly and truly and completely believe that the way you're doing it is the only right way. There's no room for women to hold a different position or a different role in the church if it challenges the way that you're doing it now. There's no room for it. Because they're coming from the place of my solution is better than yours. Recognizing that in myself has been really, really hard. It's one of the things that I feel like I'm doing really well on, but I still struggle with that. Someone will give a solution, and most commonly it's my wife will give a solution to a problem, and my initial impulse is to think, nah, that's not going to work. I'll come up with something better. It's my initial impulse, and I've learned to stifle that. I've learned to shut up long enough to listen to the suggestion, give it the proper credence, which means I have to actually try and understand the suggestion so that I can give it the weight that it deserves. And sometimes it's exactly what needs to happen. Her solution is perfect. It is the way that it is. Sometimes her solution just won't work. Most of the time it falls somewhere in the middle where her solution will work. Maybe it's not the best way to do it, but it's a good way. And then I have to just balance and we have to decide between the two of us what will work best. And it allows for communication and for growth for us as a couple. But if I don't ever give it the time of day, neither one of us can grow. And she's repressed. It was the same thing that happened when I wasn't really studying and I was shutting her up. Even though it wasn't really my intention, I was coming from the place that what I knew was better than what she knew. And I had to give that up in order to understand her. The last one, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit before, and I feel really awkward in saying this, but I'm going to be vulnerable in this way because this sounds very, you know what, I'll just say it. You can decide what it sounds like. I am quick to assume that I'm the smartest person in the room. I have never really had that idea challenged until I went to anesthesia school. Now, what I mean by that is it was never challenged in a way that I recognized. Like, I am not saying that I am the smartest person in the room and I always have been in every situation that I've been in, because that's not true. Every aspect of my life, I've been around people that are smarter than me. But for some reason, I get this idea, and I think it's connected with things like patriarchy, with misogynism, with racial bias, with, political bias. I've grown up in a country that both my religion and the members of the country have constantly shouted the fact that it is the very best. And you don't see the difference until you go to other countries who have lots of national pride, until you recognize that the things that you learned about a race. So I grew up in a town for the first 9 years of my life. I lived in Mesa, Arizona, which is a really big town. But at that point, then I moved to Pine Top Lakeside in Arizona, very small town, 3,000 to 6,000 people, expanded a lot during the winter because we had snow and people would come up and ski and things like that, or it was comfortable in the summer, so a lot of people would come up and snowbird. But I lived next to an older black couple, and there was one black boy in my high school. That's all I remember when it comes to African American and blacks. And I hope that I'm not offending people by saying black. I know that everyone has their own preference there. I've had lots of friends, and I have asked and investigated this. I've had lots of friends that preferred African American. I've had lots of friends that prefer black. I am not trying to be disrespectful at all. I hope that that can translate into what I'm saying. So I had 3 black people that I knew all of my middle school to high school growing up, and then even the first year or so of marriage. I just was not around them. And so you develop prejudices because you grow up around people that have them. Pretty certain that one of my grandparents was prejudiced just in the things that he has said or had said before he passed away. And it wasn't until really that I joined the Army and I was around every shape and size, every race, lots of men and women, and exposure to all of that was when I started to recognize my own inherent prejudices, my own biases, and work through those and work over those and get rid of them. Because I was around people who were spectacular. I was around people that sucked, and they came in all races. And I was able to gratefully get past a lot of those prejudices and biases. There's still a part of me growing up. And so every once in a while, they'll still creep in, and I have to manage them and recognize them and deal with them in a way that is appropriate and respectful to the people around me. So I don't believe that I'm the smartest person in the room. I am aware enough to recognize that I have a lot of academic talents that have really helped me to be successful in the academic realm and in the nursing realm. I'm very good at the procedures and things that we do as a nurse and now as a nurse anesthetist. I'm very good at those things, and I am not arrogant about that. I'm really just stating them as me recognizing that I am good at these things. I'm good at my job. And that can quickly and easily turn into arrogance, and that is not what I mean. It's not an arrogant thing for me. It is simply recognizing that's the case. But if I go back to this and recognize that I'm quick to assume I'm the smartest person in the room, if I can recognize that, it allows me to change it. It allows me to take concerted efforts to reach out to understand and value other people's opinions, recognize that they have good ones, to recognize that the IQ in the room simply doesn't matter, to recognize that the vocabulary in the room simply doesn't matter. The ideas that are presented can be incredibly valuable if I can let go of the fact that I'm the smartest person. And how does this apply to religion, to high demand religions, to other parts of our lives? If it kind of goes along with the one before that quick to assume that my solution will be better than yours. If I think I'm the smartest person in the room, and let me equate that a little bit to the structure of the Mormon Church. Whether or not Russell M. Nelson, who's the current prophet, assumes that he's the smartest person in the room, he does assume, because it is church doctrine, that he is the strongest person in the room, that his opinion carries more weight than anyone else's, that ultimately a decision will come down to him. If he doesn't like the decisions that are made, he can change them. That is very similar to the idea that I'm the smartest person in the room. And I would imagine that as a listener, you can understand why that's a problem. It's not okay for him to immediately assume that almost the idea of my way or the highway. Like, it's going to happen the way that I say. And that is... that idea in Mormonism and other high demand religions is backed up by the fact that, quote unquote, they're being taught by God. And maybe they are. Maybe they are. I won't take that from anyone. If you believe that they are being instructed by God, great. Good for you. Good on you. But if that belief that they're being instructed by God does not allow you to adequately assess a situation, then you have put yourself in a place of thought stopping. If you look at a policy, look at the 2015 policy, where the church denied baptism to children in a gay or lesbian marriage. If you cannot look objectively at that situation and recognize that if that was in fact a revelation from God, that policy was put in place by God, as Russell M. Nelson stated, then you have to wrestle with the fact that 3 years later, we're getting a revelation from God again, because they're calling it a revelation. You have to wrestle with the fact that God is fickle. God is fickle in that situation. Or you have to wrestle with the fact that he is not getting revelation the way that he claims. And he's using the claim of revelation to back up his spot as the smartest person in the room, as the one with the ideas that will always be best. The lessons that I've learned have allowed me to be able to step back and examine more critically and more objectively what a situation appears to be. And it has sucked in a lot of ways. It has really sucked in a lot of ways because it has racked my foundation. It has forced me to look at things that I have always trusted with 100% implicit confidence. It has forced me to look at them with an eye of the possibility of them being wrong. If there's no possibility that Russell M. Nelson is not a prophet, I will never be able to objectively look at the decisions that have been made and the things that have been said and be able to evaluate them with my own brain. Now, my brain is certainly not superior to other brains or to every other brain. We all have our brains are superior to some and certainly inferior to others. What I mean is, I don't necessarily think that I can trust that every idea or critical thought that comes into my brain is the right one. But that's what I have other people for, to help me examine a situation. But if I can't ever let them in, if I can't ever have the thought that their idea might be better than mine, that they might be smarter than I am, that they don't completely understand me, I don't completely understand them, that if my passion levels are rising, it's time to reevaluate. If I can't do those things, then I cannot truly critically evaluate a situation. I can't evaluate when my wife needs me to mourn with her. I can't evaluate why my kid is throwing a fit because all I want to do is fix it. I've been there so many times in my life. So many times. And I'm just now really learning that the emotions come first. That I have to be with them emotionally, and then I can help them with the problem. But oftentimes I find that once I'm with them emotionally, they don't need my help. They already know what needs to happen. They just needed me to be with them. They needed me to cry with them. They needed me to validate the fact that it's okay for them to be upset by this situation. They didn't need me to fix it. I have learned and grown so much by being involved in this podcast, by studying the things that are troublesome in Mormon history. Every church has some troublesome history. Every organization has things that they probably haven't done quite right. There's some rationalization for some of them. There's some times where we're going to say, you know what, that's okay. That's not a big deal for me. I can still be a part of this organization. And there's going to be other times where that is not okay. I'm stepping away. I have made the decision in my life that it's time for me to step away from Mormonism. I'm not having my name removed. I'm not giving up any of the covenants, quote unquote, that I made. But for now, I feel like I need to just step away. And that was a rough decision. And I was only able to make it because I have learned what some of my poor qualities are when it comes to assessing a situation, a conversation, a person, an idea, a belief. Because I have learned better how to assess them, I have been able to be more open and critical about what things mean, and it has forced me into a different position. And I'm happy with it. I'm happy with it because I was able to make it from an emotional and a rational place. I have loved being here. This podcast has been wonderful. Sarah and I both talk about how this is one of our favorite things that we get to do together. And I don't think I will be on here by myself very often, but I hope that the things I was able to share were helpful. I'm certainly no expert at these things. I'm still learning how to be self-reflective. I'm still learning how to talk to myself, to have conversations with myself and figure things out, to ponder, to assess, but I am getting better, and it has been a wonderful experience. I hope that you have an amazing week, an amazing day, an amazing month, whatever it is that you're needing. I hope that it's great. I love you, and I appreciate all of you that are here with us, traveling this journey together. Thank you, and have a good one.
Today's episode was hosted by Mason Westbrook, produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalas. We would love to see you on our Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma Facebook page.